Well, a very good morning and welcome to Media Monitor here on the SABC News channel, where we get to unpack all the biggest stories of this week. I'm your host, Alicia Jade. Thank you so much for choosing us. As always, it's 900 hours. Let's take a quick look at the lineup that we have for you today. We start by analyzing the much talked about cabinet reshuffle. The repo rate remained unchanged at 7%, and South Africa bade farewell to Uncle Kathy at the age of 87. And finally, we wrap up the show by looking at the latest developments around the SASSA payment saga. First, as always, it's 9 a.m. time for the news headlines. Mudslides have killed 254 people and left hundreds injured or missing after destroying homes in southern Colombia. They are the latest victims of floods that have struck the Pacific side of South America over the recent months, also killing many people in Peru and Ecuador. Former Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan has joined calls for a mass protest against the recent cabinet reshuffle. Gordhan, who was fired along with his deputy Mcebisi Jonas, was speaking at the memorial service of the late struggle stalwart Ahmed KATHRADA in the Johannesburg City Hall yesterday. The memorial was characterized by calls for President Jacob Zuma to step down, and Gordhan meanwhile again dismissed any suggestions that he was part of a ploy to overthrow the government, and he did call for the NC to return to its former glory. Now, in your sports news, a dramatic slump by the African champions, Abafana Bestal Mamelodi Sundowns in the South African Premiership continued when they lost 2-1 to Kaizer Chiefs in Soweto last night. Before falling to Chiefs, Sundowns failed to score when drawing with Chippa United, losing to Cape Town City and drawing again with Polokwane City. The Downs look set to comfortably retain the South African title just a couple of months ago, and they are now in a 5-club title race. Well, the cabinet reshuffle saw the rand depreciate, moving from 12 rand 80 to the US dollar on Thursday evening to trade as high as 13 rand 62 to the US dollar by early Friday morning. We'll take a look at the impact of the reshuffle that it has had on the economy. And for this, we're very pleased to be joined here in studio by the director and chief economist at Econometrics, Dr. Ezra German. Doctor, what a pleasure. Good morning.
Good morning to you.
Doctor, we've seen all the reactions, mostly of shock because of the recent cabinet reshuffle. What was your reaction to this?
I am obviously very afraid of what this reshuffle will do to the economy, for the simple reason that it is going to be seen both by domestic and foreign investors as an indication of the fact that the country's economy is now captured by certain interested parties who are going to try to manipulate government finances in such a way as to organize deals that benefit a handful of elite few rather than the majority of people. Doctor,
look, the ratings agencies are, of course, the biggest issue that the country is currently faced with. And, of course, the new finance minister says he'll prioritize the meeting with the agencies. He's already set up meetings with them and also prioritize radical economic transformation projects. And he says he's already been scheduled to deal with the ratings agencies. But do you think he's fit for this job?
First of all, I think that his record thus far has been very poor. He inflicted a lot of damage on public enterprises when he was Minister of Public Enterprises, and then subsequently on the foreign tourist industry by introducing certain measures he was warned not to do. And when he did do so, foreign tourism fell very sharply, and he was forced to rescind those measures. And the moment he did, foreign tourism boomed last year. So yes, one has to call into question whether he is fit for the job, and there are also suggestions that his record as far as financial integrity are open to question.
Doctor, look, a lot of people are worried or rather curious about the timing of this reshuffle, particularly the rand was getting to be stable, the drought was slowly diminishing, the economy was starting to recover as the global growth was also starting to look better. What do you read about the timing of this reshuffle?
Yes, I think it's absolutely unfortunate. You were starting to see the initial hopes of an economic recovery. I have to emphasize that it's not just about the rand. The most important thing is about capital investment in the country and infrastructural investment. And what we have seen in the last few years, and the main contributor towards the fall in our economic growth, has been a fall off in capital investment, which means that we are eroding the ability to reform the economy radically and provide the goods and services that we need in the future. And the recent events are going to put a nail in the coffin of any hopes of encouraging higher capital investment in the country.
Which brings me to my next question, Doctor. I mean, let's project in the next 6 months period in terms of what we are likely to see as a result of this. How does this affect us going forward in terms of interest rates, your export-import trade, fiscal deficit, petrol prices, food prices, things like that?
Yes, unfortunately, a classic example of what might happen is that next week we're going to have a cut in the petrol price and the diesel price. But the month thereafter, as a result of the fall in the rand that we've just had, we are going to see those prices rebounding upwards. So make hay, do all your traveling in April, because in May it'll be more expensive. And that's how it's going to affect the man in the street. I would suggest that the rand thus far has not fallen enough for interest rates for us to start thinking about raising interest rates. In fact, the rand is no worse now than it was back in January, so let's not get too hit up about this. But if we break through this 1350, 1360 level, there's no telling how far the currency could fall. And then we swing from an environment in which there were hopes that interest rates would be reduced to an environment where people will start fearing an interest rate increase. And that will put an end, for example, to the stabilization in car sales that we have seen in the recent few months, because people will now start fearing, oh, no, if I go and buy a car, the rate of interest is going to rise. No, I better hold off.
Doctor, do we have enough time to recover our economy before those ratings agencies actually come and review?
No, I don't think that we have enough time.
So and, are we seeing a possible downgrade?
I think we're seeing a probable downgrade now.
Downgrade.
Certainly the first sign of that was the report given by Fitch. Admittedly, they're not the leading rating agency, but on Friday they came out with a report in which they kind of insinuated that in light of what's happening now, they may well need to review their rating. And that means junk status.
Doctor, look, here's a very interesting figure. You know, banks apparently shed 36 billion rand the time Minister Nhlanhla was actually fired. And apparently it wasn't that bad when Malusi Gigaba was appointed and Pravin Gordhan was actually appointed. What do you read into this variation?
The big reason why the banks' shares fell, in my view, is because if you're looking for radical economic transformation, one of the objectives of that will be to restructure the nature of ownership in the South African economy in such a way as to reduce the concentration of power in the hands of a few. And nowhere is this more evident than in the banking sector, where 4 big banks control 91% of all the banking sector in the economy. So clearly the banks, especially in light of the shenanigans that have been going on between the Guptas and the Minister of Finance and the President wanting to intervene, the banks feel very vulnerable that there's going to be action taken against them under the new Finance Ministry.
Let's talk about Treasury now. How do you think Treasury is going to be able to function in the midst of all this controversy and having a new minister being appointed in less than 4 years?
Yes, I think the key here is to question whether or not there are going to be further departures from Treasury. It's a very powerful team of experts, and some of them may feel very uneasy and resign. Thus far, the good news is that Lungisa Fuzile has stayed on as Director General, seemingly, and that is a source of stability. But one is concerned about Treasury kind of falling apart. And the second point to make that I ask myself is, Malusi Gigaba has said he wants to embark upon radical economic transformation in the context of maintaining fiscal discipline. And I find the two a little contradictory.
How so, Doc?
Because radical economic transformation means starting to loosen the shackles of fiscal rectitude.
I'm sure.
And starting to spend without constraint on building houses, uplifting the poor, and empowering the poor. And if that is the case, then you've got a contradiction. And this is where the ratings agencies come in. They must be terrified that our public debt is going to surge ahead now under a new Treasury administration.
Doctor, I just want to hear your view about this. You know, a lot of people have been saying we need to stop as South Africans to personalizing institutions. I mean, this is a public entity. Therefore, whoever comes into work there is supposedly deemed fit to run the institution. So we shouldn't worry about who's running it, but what it's actually doing for the majority of South Africans.
Well, the point is the majority of South Africans need to realize that there is no such thing as a free lunch in the world. If they want upliftment, then they need to have access to capital markets internationally. And if there is no oversight body such as the Treasury that is effective in keeping an oversight over how money is spent, then unfortunately, ultimately, even in the short term, you may see largesse and spending. In the longer term, there'll be even more fiscal constraints, as we have seen in Zimbabwe, for example.
Doctor, before I let you go, a very quick one. What should we be mostly worried about as South Africans as we look towards the future of a probable downgrade, as you've stated?
What should be we most worried about is that we don't actually reach a resolution to this, and that the fluid situation with regard to our leadership continues. The best thing, and the one reason why maybe the rand didn't fall as much as some might have thought it, is because some people see this as the climax of the political turmoil that might see the ushering in of a new leadership that manages to somehow get us out of the morass that we are gliding into.
Doctor, that is very scary news. Thank you so much for coming in and unpacking it for us. Yeah, that is Dr. Eza Jamin, the chief economist at Econometrics, talking to us about the economical effects of the recent announcement of the cabinet reshuffle. After the break, we interrogate the political aspect of the cabinet reshuffle. Is coming up after this.
From the moment you start your day. Good morning, everybody. It is 6 o'clock.
We are there for you.
You want a guarantee from the leadership that we should not be leaders who will steal? I'm prepared to give that guarantee that we should not steal from our people.
We bring your morning into perspective.
This is the reason they keep putting fees up. They're not getting enough money.
We'll make sure that you get the full story.
The police officers from specifically Moffat View Police Station, they support these brothels. What have you found upon your investigations on this matter?
I cannot deny those allegations.
And you can count on the weather team with expertise.
Join us live at 6 a.m. daily.
In 2013, there were similar disturbances at this very facility. And it would seem to me that this time around, the same issues that led to those disturbances are still prevalent.
This time around, funny enough, the 26, 27, 28 gangs ganged together and attacked officials, which is for us something that is very abnormal, and it has never happened
almost 23 years into our democracy, we are still confronted with a system that is as violent as in the dark days of apartheid.
The Department of Correctional Services has transformed from a prison system to a correctional system.
I've been arguing since time immemorial, and it doesn't help. When you argue with facts and you speak truth to power, justice and authority, then you are seen as being arrogant and confrontational. I came here because I've been around the block many times, and Mr. Modise is a seasoned correctional officer. He knows exactly what is going in there. He knows exactly what needs to be done. And he knows for the fact that the Department of Correctional Services can't do it all by themselves.
Welcome back. We're still talking the recent cabinet reshuffle announcement. Whether it was a night of the long knives or a midnight mauling, whatever the turn of phrase, it was a veritable cabinet bloodbath. 5 ministers were sacked outright. Another 4 changed portfolios. But the main casualty was Pravin Gordhan, while a finance minister. His purging and that of his deputy minister Mcebisi Jonas sent the rand tumbling and markets into turmoil. In the aftermath, the schism in the ANC's top 6 was glaring. ANC Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa, Secretary General Gwede Mantashe, and even Treasurer General Dr. Zweli Mkhize were clearly worried about the implications. Let's find out more from this clip.
A hero's send-off for Gordhan and Jonas by National Treasury staff members. Gordhan first quibbled about the manner in which they were removed last night.
We must firstly say to you that we also stayed up like you last night because we learnt our fate from the TV screen, not from any phone call, nor from any chat or conversation. But the TV screen spoke to us. So that was, I'm sure, as interesting for us as it was for you.
A fuming Gordhan then lambasted the intelligence report President Zuma is said to have based his decision on.
This is the so-called intelligence report. This is the so-called intelligence report which said that, amongst others, the 2 of us and the Director General are involved in this massive conspiracy to undermine the economy of this country. And if you read this, this is absolute nonsense. This is not the basis upon which you fire, inverted commas, or release from their responsibilities, which are more polite way, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, of saying it, a Minister of Finance and a Deputy Minister of Finance.
But he said they were not bitter about their removal and wished his successor, Malusi Gigaba, well.
I've just had a word with him and congratulated him on his appointment and informed him that he might find us in this space. You know, we've got to do some packing of boxes. And he understood. And we offered to meet with him on Monday by agreement so that we could take him through the key issues that he has to deal with once he takes responsibility as Minister of Finance with his deputy.
For his part, Mcebisi Jonas was philosophical about the whole situation.
You have in front of you history unfolding. And at the center of that history that is unfolding is a democracy in a sense, and the democracy in a sense, and economy in a sense, being undermined by all sorts of things. And some of those are actually diversion of state resources to serve particular interests.
In spite of everything, Gordhan says he and President Zuma have a good personal relationship, and he looks forward to getting together with him to discuss the goings-on in the world over a cup of tea. The 2 men say they are not going to resign as members of parliament. Mbongeni Muchwa, SABC News, Pretoria.
All right, for this segment, let me welcome my gentleman for today, UJ Professor of Political Science, Dr. Mcebisi Ndlekyana, as well as political analyst, Professor Sipho Siepe. Gentlemen, a very good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
Gentlemen, what was your reactions to the cabinet reshuffle? Let's start with you, Prof.
Well, let me first start by just prefacing the comment by saying the reshuffle was long coming. If you looked at the media in the last year, the question revolved largely around Pravin. And if you look at the insert, what was said, and probably disheartening, is the comment made by Pravin that he only had this through
on Twitter,
in the media. Yeah. You would expect that at least there should have been a bit of a decency in handling it. But what it also shows at the same time is the extent of the relationship that had been broken between him and the president. So and this is something that has been reported in almost for more than 2 years. And but what I also found unfortunate is that the last time we were here, the president talked about the radical economic transformation, and we agreed with him. And when I listened to the former minister, I found him aligning himself largely to that agenda. But I should also say, I disagree with Azajamin when he talks about the radical economic transformation in the manner that he thinks. I say sometimes you must actually speak about what is on paper. And what's on paper, for me, does not even speak about radical economic transformation. I mean, simply to say you want to bring more people into, to de-racialize the economy, should not necessarily mean just spending spree. And if you listen to Malusi, he says, and also Fuzile. Actually, Fuzile yesterday, the DG, said it is not for nothing that when you listen to the president, as State of the Nation address, he did not even mention nuclear. And yet some people think that the nuclear is on the, but he was saying, we are going to stick, we are professionals. Our job is to make sure that we don't spend more than, but what he said is really the manner in which this was politically managed. But also what was also interesting is something that most of us have always said, that the idea of the broad church is broken. I mean, if you see, I mean, we can accept that there are differences within the ANC. But when they begin to play themselves out, it is not good for the ANC. And some people say, well, I mean, I don't know whether what is not good for the ANC is not good for the country. I mean, that's a different argument together. But what we see now is really escalation of the tensions and the inability of the ANC to manage the contradictions. But in as much as one says that, it is very clear that the position that was taken by the SACP, I mean, the president was dead that we would respond, and all political decisions and actions have the political consequences. So we should not be surprised that you found this reaction, because the reaction was really almost choreographed. You go to the KATHRADA funeral, it was very clear what the positions was, and the president was being dead. But I thought for me the last straw was when the SACP took a position, because it was simply saying, you will not do it. And then his hand was actually forced to have to deal with it. But of course, as I say, every decision has a political consequence. But to the credit of at least the three, the Ramaphosa, I mean, also one of the things I must actually mention is that I don't understand why the presidency decided to use a document that would whose credibility would be questionable. If you want to remove somebody,
the intelligence report.
The former president says, when you invite somebody, you can disinvite that person. You don't have to give any reason. And that question was raised when he removed Paulo Jordan. He says, I did not seek advice on why, so I'm not seeking advice on why I'm removing. So he could have acted that. But what it also shows in our democracy is the weakness of how do you manage the prerogative? You see, as I was saying earlier to you, in the United States, the president can select who he wants, but that selection is subjected to scrutiny through a Senate confirmation hearing. And maybe what we also need in this country is also a way of managing so that we don't have these major fallouts. But what we have here is an absolute prerogative. And Cyril, as well as what you call Gwede and the Treasurer General, were able to say, well, we just disagree, but it is prerogative. But for me, it suggests a possibility of changing something so that we don't get to these scenarios.
Prof, what do you think?
Well, it's a breach of oath. Yes,
on whose side?
On the side of the president,
side.
certainly, because the president does have the prerogative to fire and appoint. He does have those rights.
Yes.
But in the Constitution says, as he takes his oath, the very first line in Schedule 1 of the attachments of that Constitution is that he always has to take decisions in a way that advances the interests of the Republic.
Yes.
And then specifically says those decisions should not bring harm. It's very important to underline that. They should not bring harm. We have seen this movie before. This is a rerun of a very terrible movie where a minister is fired for having done a very good job. That was Nhlanhla Nene. And there were harsh consequences that followed that. Our economy took a dip and all that. So the idea was that you shouldn't do something whose consequences you can see that they are terrible, right? And we know since then, President has been wanting to fire Pravin. He's been doing all sorts of things, all sorts of shenanigans. It was quite clear that he was determined to get rid of him, specifically because he was exercising financial integrity, ethical leadership, stopping the president from providing unnecessary tenders, wastage of money, and acquiring things that we cannot afford. So what you have here is a competent minister fired for doing a good job. This is alarming. It means that the president no longer cares to do a good job. It means that the executive authority has been usurped by interest outside of the ANC and outside of the executive. In fact, the three top officials of the ANC, Mkhize Kwete and Cyril Ramaphosa, said the list of changes that the president presented to them was not an ANC list. It was done elsewhere. It is unprecedented that you would have ANC officials disagreeing openly. They were essentially using the same wording, actually. So it shows that, for me, the president is in breach of oath. He's really not fit to be president because his decisions do not advance the interest of the Republic. They bring harm. That's a very fundamental point to underscore. They bring harm. They do not advance our interests.
So now who do we blame? Do we blame the ANC or the president on this, Professor? And should we be scared? I mean, Professor Ndlekian has just spoken about the fact that, a good minister was firing for doing a good job. There's been serious questions about why Bathabile Dlamini is still in her position and Faith Mutambi moved to another department as well instead of being reshuffled or completely being thrown out, Prof?
Well, the good thing that we have in this country is that we have a functioning democracy. The mere fact that we can sit here and make these statements that we make, it's part of the democracy. But what it also shows that the ANC itself, for as long as the ANC does not sort itself. Remember when they had their former president, they actually reached a point where they felt that he's doing more harm to them. Whether he was doing more harm to the country is something that, but it was very clear that even the very same agencies that we talk about had also complained about this political threat or what they call political tension as not good for South Africa. So this pretense of saying we didn't see it coming, but what the president cannot run away from is, and the ANC cannot run away from, is that they were warned. And the market did also warn them that if you do this, this is what is going to happen. So that is a challenge. But for me, I find solace in the fact that we still have people who rush to the courts, like the DA, like the EFF. We still have people who can mobilize on the ground. But also, we must also be truthful that politics is also about numbers. That in as much as we hold certain views strongly, There are other people who hold other views very strongly. But the point you're making is really that how do we act in a manner that advances the Republic rather than harm it?
Prof, you know, while you're speaking of numbers, I mean, a lot of people are already saying that even analysts long before this were predicting that if President Zuma fires Pravin Gordhan and Mcebisi Jonas, this will set the ANC for a definite loss come the 2019 polls. Prof, very quick one.
I mean, it's obvious. It's obvious that, and it's self-sabotage because the ANC has just dropped about 8%.
But why, if he knew what the implications of his decisions would be?
Because he's indebted to certain interests. He has promised people certain things. He's behaving as if someone has a gun on his head, and that's even more alarming, perhaps. That what else is he capable of doing, and what do these people have on him? That he feels that he should respond to them even to the risk of harming the interest of the Republic. The president is certainly captured. He is indebted to certain interests. They are wielding something over his head. It looks like he has no choice but to answer to them, to please them. The executive authority has been usurped.
So then what happens?
This is dereliction of duty. You don't do things. It's not like he's ignorant. He knows what will happen. Every right-minded person has been telling him that this would be a terrible thing. His own ANC managed to get some sense and told him that this would be terrible. And yet he has gone ahead. Nonetheless, he doesn't care anymore.
So does this mean that the MPs, the ANC MPs are going to vote for the motion of no confidence? Very quickly, Professor, we have to go to break.
Well, I've heard this notion of members resigning. The SSP suggested that their members are going to walk out.
They're going to recall,
I still want to see Russia to the president's office with people sending the resignation letters. Ultimately, people say, really, if you believe that you have a corrupt president, you have a corrupt administration, you disassociate yourself with it. I have not seen that happen.
Let's come back to that point.
Prof, what do you think? A quick one before we go to break. Do you think they're going to vote in favor?
I do believe that if you think the country is at risk, you need to do everything necessary. You can't be outraged and yet act in a way that shows outrage. I think there should be a walkout. That would send a very strong sign.
Let's also remember that there has been a shutdown, a complete shutdown that has been called by various constituencies. It's going to take place tomorrow. We're going to take a quick ad break, and after that, struggle stalwart Ahmed KATHRADA died at the age of 87. We're going to take a look at the legacy of Uncle Kathy just after this.
President Jacob Zuma says that the country's security agencies will seek new and more effective ways to fight crime.
Crime, as you would appreciate, depends on the circumstances. This narrative that South Africans are xenophobic, we don't necessarily agree with it.
This group of Bangladeshi shop owners ooze frustration. They've lost everything.
I'm like totally destroyed. I can't see what I'll do, where I'll go.
Rescue workers are still searching for the body of a 5-year-old boy who fell into an old mine shaft near Boksburg in Ekurhuleni.
Tensions remain high, with thousands of community members refusing to clear the scene until the boy is found.
What is environmental health?
In Section 24 of the Constitution, the environmental right has a second part, which is to encourage people to be active citizens and gives us the right to participate in politics and organize and raise awareness so that the environmental right can be guaranteed.
using coal and wood and paraffin to cook with or to heat their space or to heat water. These are basic fundamentals, and I think if we can address that alone, we will make a huge impact, an environmental impact on the health of our population.
Food that comes into the country, the vigilance at the ports and harbours is being checked at the moment currently by environmental practitioners who are port officers at those ports. They need to be more stringent in terms of control of what comes into the country.
Join Health Talk every Saturday for all your health news.
Struggle icon and one of the only 3 remaining Rivonia trialists, Ahmed KATHRADA, was laid to rest in Johannesburg early this week. The passing of the 87-year-old ANC veteran, who was hailed as a unifier and one not afraid to speak the truth to power, is viewed as a huge loss to the country. Now, calls were made during his funeral to young people in particular to preserve his legacy of non-racialism and to live up to his ideals. Let's take a look at this insert.
Run this way, run this way.
A fitting send-off for a revolutionary giant, a life dedicated in service of the people.
Cassie never ceased to love engaging with ordinary people. And I, and all of us who've been close to him, are so exceptionally privileged to have spent the last 27 years of his life with this man who was so engaged, so wise, and so incredibly principled.
KATHRADA'S widow also tore into government for the last-minute cancellation of his memorial service
and will obey, respect,
and the changes to President Jacob Zuma's executive.
If you had eyes to hear, ears to hear, and eyes to see, you would have not appointed 4 finance ministers in less than 3 years. You would not have recalled our finance minister, one of our finest finance ministers, from an international roadshow.
In attendance, some of those axed ministers, including Pravin Gordhan. Gordhan again dismissed any suggestion he was part of a ploy to overthrow the government and called for the ANC to return to its former glory.
This intelligence report says we went out to meet certain people in order to sabotage our economy. Now, why on earth will be activists and bureaucrats who've given 20 years, in the case of the bureaucrats, who have committed themselves to democracy and are trying to do their best to, as Comrade Solly said, contribute to good governance in our own humble way, why would they want to go out there to sabotage this economy?
Meanwhile, the SACP, an alliance partner, after concluding its Politburo, also resolved that the president must go.
The ANC at this moment, as well as the alliance movement as a whole, have a choice to make. Either President Zuma or the people of South Africa.
Some are calling it a defining moment, a country engrossed in political turmoil and resistance that may reverse the democratic gains fought for by the likes of Ahmed KATHRADA. So yet again, a call not to praise or mourn Uncle Kathy, but to emulate his example. Crisalda Lewis, SABC News, at the Johannesburg City Hall.
Professor Ndlekyana, let's pay homage to the late icon, even though his passing was marred by serious controversy.
Well, he was a great person. Went to prison at 33 and came out at 60. So almost spent half of his life at the time in prison. This is the good thing that we have, I think, is that we have these iconic leaders. So we have a reference point as to what good leadership is. We cannot be fooled into believing something else, and we will always call on the memory of such individuals to remind ourselves of the sacrifices that went into creating this new South Africa, and also vow not to dishonor their memory. That is why it is so important to remember. We should never forget things, and funerals, unfortunately, provide a moment to reflect, because we have to speak about the life of these people. Are we living up to their memory? You know, we shouldn't act as if we have no ancestry. As they say in Xhosa.
Yes.
We should emulate the example of our parentage. And this is what we then remind ourselves at funerals. So inevitably, funerals become a critique against those who defile good leadership. There's a reason why Jacob Zuma did not go to the funeral. He was not disinvited. No one is invited to a funeral. He didn't go because he wouldn't have measured up. And this is the second funeral that he didn't go to. So it is now becoming official that the President of the Republic is banned from funerals of honorable people because he dishonors the funeral. That's the message. It's now official.
Prof, what do you think?
Well, you know, the advantage of youth here, you can afford to be as unforgiving as it does. But the long and short of it is that really people like him, I mean, what is correct is that we do have to pay attention to that history. And for me, what is unfortunate, that the history is not in our school books. The same as the history of the Bikos, even their pronouncements and all that. So we are almost free-floating without a proper direction that cements us or that anchors us. So I would have liked to have seen that when our kids grow, they read about people like Ahmed Katada, the Mandelas, the Mlangensi, all those, so that they should know that as you talk about the standards. But we should also be also other element is that there are other people who were with them in prison. What we should be asking is that what part of what you're talking about don't they see, because most of those people are also in government. Yeah. Those people are also in MPs. So, but for me, it is also one of those things that there's something that power does to people. Yes. And so when we begin to analyze the future of a country, we must also analyze it within the context of democracy, also within the context of power. Because if we, those who have been wise have said power corrupts and absolute power tends to corrupt, absolutely. So the question is, what are the steps that we are going to take today to make sure that we mitigate against or almost frustrate that tendency towards corruption?
I mean, how do we bestow that tall order of moral values upon our leaders, Professor Dlekian?
You see, it's a painful process because these were previously our heroes. Jacob Zuma, we looked up to them. They sacrificed their lives. They endured pain for us. So we held them up as heroes, and they have turned into villains. So we are disappointed because we had affection for them. So when someone becomes something else, then there's that personal disappointment now, and to some degree there's a moment of denialism that no, this cannot happen. Absolutely, this person cannot do this. So we need to go through some kind of a transition. Allow ourselves to be disappointed. Allow ourselves to accept that a good person can turn into something else. Exactly. This is what has happened. So once we grapple, we accept that reality, then we must summon sufficient outrage and energy to correct what has gone wrong. So it's a process that will take a little bit of time because there's personal disappointment, there's pain, but at the end of it should come necessary action to express outrage, to assert what we are. Right? Yeah. We are a democratic society. This freedom is something that everyone yearns for, and we have a tradition of protest. We should summon those traditions.
Yeah, but there's a point where I slightly disagree with him. It's an issue of waiting for a mistake to happen.
Yes.
What people have always warned us, and some people actually, I remember actually, it will be one of those unfortunate spaces to quote Tony Leon positively. But he says, if you really want to see a Democrat, the best way of seeing one is to give them power.
Yeah.
Then that's when that happens. So what is also important for us is that we must start building mechanisms, processes, and institutions that are strong enough to almost undermine what may be the frailty of individuals. And that is known in history, that the wonderful people, that you don't rely on the wonderful people. Even the former finance minister was saying that ultimately it's not about individuals. It's about making sure that the institutions are strong, the processes are strong, the systems are strong, and even when the investors come, they are more interested in whether the policies are correct, because people can easily be hit by a bus, they could easily be removed and all that. So we must take preemptive measures to make sure that we don't suffer the weaknesses of people.
All right. Well, you heard it from the professors there. Let's turn our attention now to another news just in. The ANC is convening a press briefing this morning to explain in details the proposals in its organizational renewal discussion document. Now, this is ahead of the policy conference which takes place in June. And our reporter Aldrin Sampier is there at Luthuli House. Aldrin, a very good morning to you. Talk to us about some of the proposals that are detailed in this document.
Well, good morning, Alicia. Actually, today what's going to be happening is that we have the subcommittee on communications that will be briefing the media on its discussion document and not the organizational renewal document today. Remember that the organizational renewal document was supposed to have been discussed last week, but the ANC decided to postpone that because of the NEC that was sitting over the weekend last week. So this weekend it is the communications subcommittee, and we'll be detailing issues around the funding, for instance, of the SABC. You'd remember that even during the recent parliamentary inquiry into the fitness of the SABC board to hold office, there was an issue raised around the funding of the SABC. And even if you look at the papers today, there are questions around the financial stability of the SABC as it currently stands. There have been issues raised by Save Our SABC as well, SOS, that how do you strike a balance that you have a public broadcaster that has a mandate to ensure that it is on a free-to-air channel. However, though, it also has financial obligations that it needs to meet. On the other hand, it receives funding from on a commercial basis or commercial channels like from adverts and so forth. And then on the other hand, you're supposed to be receiving funding from government as well. And this is an issue that was raised also by the former COO of the SABC, Hlaudi Mutwening, when he argued that at the moment the SABC is not receiving enough funding from government. So those are some of the issues that will be raised here during this discussion, as well, of course, as the media tribunal. Remember that the media tribunal has been a long issue that has been standing, that the ANC has been calling for a media tribunal. However, though, that has still not happened. Even at the past, at the National General Council, that was also raised, and was the Parliament was asked to fast-track the implementation of a media tribunal. And yet again, we see in this policy document, again, that issue comes up. The ANC, of course, saying that they are all for independent regulation of the media. However, though, looking at print media, for instance, when there are in terms of penalties, there are no fines involved. The mere thing that you'd get in the print media is that you'll get an apology. And I remember there was about 2 years ago, just before the NGC, the issue that was raised is that you'd have a big splash in the front page of a Sunday paper, for instance, that are making various allegations, and when the press ombudsman is approached, and the press ombudsman finds in favor of the person who has laid the complaint, the apology will be a little apology, probably on page 6 of the newspaper, and not find resonance in the front page, considering that the damage damage that has been done. But quite importantly, Alicia, is that today's communications, briefing on the communications strategy document comes at the time as the ANC is facing what some would call a political upheaval, considering that we had the recent reshuffle from President Jacob Zuma. And quite interestingly is that the subcommittee chairperson on communications is Jackson Mthembu, who's also the ANC's chief whip in Parliament. And he has made his stance quite clear around President Jacob Zuma's decision to reshuffle cabinet, but quite particularly to have the Minister Pravin Gordhan, as well as, former minister right now, Pravin Gordhan, and his former deputy, KBC Jonas, removed from Treasury.
All right, Aldrin, do tell us who will be forming part of this subcommittee discussion.
Well, a whole host of media fraternity, people from the media fraternity will be part of these discussions. And about 2 weeks ago, I was speaking to someone within the communications department of the ANC, speaking about whether analysts should be invited to such briefings to be part of the discussions that will be taking place. So I guess that we could see a few analysts that will come through. I see last week as well, when we had the discussion around what was not the organizational renewal document, just forgetting what that first document was that we discussed. We had Professor Siepe, who's also a renowned political analyst, who was part of the discussions, and it really speaks to the ANC trying to elevate the level of debate with regards to issues that it's raised in its document as well as the proposals.
Aldrin, just maybe a very quick one. I know you touched on it a little bit. I mean, this issue of the reshuffling, the recent reshuffling, what exactly will they be debating about this? Is it because the president didn't consult? I mean, what kind of issues can we expect to come up around the reshuffling?
Well, first of all, if you look at Jackson Mthembu's Twitter timeline, I think about 2 tweets which he sent out quite recently, I think yesterday, where he spoke about dissatisfaction around the reshuffling of cabinet, and of course KBC Jonas as well, also speaking on the intelligence report. And we've heard from various other politicians speaking about what they call the dubious intelligence report, and well as a flimsy intelligence report. And we'll have to wait and see what some of the questions will come here from the media. Although the ANC has previously made it clear that these briefings are briefings on the discussion documents and not current affairs, one can't rule out the possibility that my colleagues from the media will try and push to get a comment from Jackson Mthembu with regards to the current affairs issues, quite particularly on the president's decision for the cabinet reshuffle and how that impacts the work of the ANC in Parliament. You've seen the Sunday papers today reporting on a possible push to get President Jacob Zuma to resign, or either, if he does not resign, to have a motion of no confidence, which has been pushed by the DA, which will then be supported by certain ANC MPs. We've heard from the DA leader, Musi Maimane, saying that there are some ANC MPs that have approached him and said that they will be supporting the DA in this motion of no confidence. Of course, they have the EFF as well, the EFF saying that they will also be pushing for the motion of no confidence and voting with the DA. That's if the Speaker of Parliament does allow that motion of no confidence to go ahead. And of course, later on this afternoon, we are expecting a briefing from Balekambet.
Thank you so much for that update. That is Aldrin Sampier. We will go back to Luthuli House live for that briefing. Gentlemen, what do you think about that, Prof? I see you smiling and actually shaking your head in agreement to some of the things that Aldrin was talking about there.
No, Nkobisi and I and other analysts, we are part of the discussion around the policy document. Yeah. And I think our assessment, if you were to sum up, is that the ANC is very good in analyzing problems. But when you move from a good analysis to the solutions, we find them quite wanting. But what I think on this matter, for some of us, the biggest challenge of the ANC is not outside. The ANC should not be looking for enemies outside. The biggest challenge is within the ANC. It needs to sort itself out.
All right, a quick one, Prof.
Yes, the enemy is within. The ANC talks about reforms, this and that, acting ethically, writing in these big documents. What you are seeing now happening is undoing all of that. So what is the point of this document about reforms when presidents' actions are doing exactly the opposite? So why discuss this? It looks very fake.
Very interesting what's actually going to come out there, particularly after this reshuffle, as we heard from Aldrin Sampear there, even the chief whip having a say. And it's going to be very interesting to see what the top six altogether there will have to say about this. Well, that's where we leave it for Media Monitor. Let me thank my studio guests, the lovely professors, for their sound analysis of all the big stories of this week. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm back on top of the hour with AM News.